Over the years, a common debate has been whether violent media like video games and movies cause violence in the viewers and players. In the 50s and 60s, more and more households began to have TV sets in them. During this time, behavioral researchers began to look at the effects of the violent media. In 1982, the National Institute of Mental Health conducted a study that found the following effects on viewing violent television. Children can become less sensitive to the pain of others, children can become more scared of the world around them, and children can become more likely to behave in violent and aggressive ways towards others. These effects are similar to how the Parsons children are not sensitive to the pain of people being hanged, and instead are excited to see it. They also act very violent towards Winston, calling him a traitor and shooting a slingshot at him. L. Raoul Huseman and Leonard Eron are psychologists who found in studies that children who watched many hours of television in elementary school usually showed higher levels of aggression when they became teenagers, and by watching the participants into their adulthood, they found that those who watched lots of TV violence when they were around 8 were more likely to be arrested for crimes as adults. They also found that being violent as a child did not necessarily correlate to watching violent TV as a teenager. Later research by psychologists Douglas Gentile and Brad Bushman suggested that exposure to violent movies and TV is one of several factors like childhood drama and violent role models that can lead to violent behavior. Violent media can make people with these factors to be up to 10% more likely to cause harm to someone else. Violent media is so prevalent because it sells so well. This is similar to how Winston writes in his diary that there are only war movies in 1984. People love violent media like war and action movies with dramatic fight scenes and violence. This is shown in 1984 when Winston talks about the woman and her child watching a very violent movie. The violence in the movie could very well cause the child to become more violent and even help the party torture dissidents. Arguably the most violent form of media is video games. By the player controlling the character, it connects them to the actions that they are doing on screen that much more than movies and TV. Many studies have claimed to find links that playing violent video games lead to acts of real-world violence, but other counter-studies have shown there to be no obvious correlation. The Natural Center for Health and Research published an article called "Violent Video Games and Aggression," which stated, "Very few studies have looked at whether playing violent video games increases the chance of later delinquency, criminal behavior, or lethal violence. Such studies are difficult to conduct and require very large numbers of children. It makes sense that since playing violent video games tends to increase the level of aggressive behavior, it would also result in more lethal violence or other criminal behaviors, but there is no clear evidence to support that assumption." However, countering studies like a 2010 study by Craig A. Anderson have produced evidence that extreme amounts of exposure to violent video games have been found to link to increased aggravation in children at school and even violent crimes like robbery and assault. In 2011, a law was proposed in California that sought to ban the sale or the rental of violent video games to minors because of the negative influence on them. The law was struck down by a decision of the Supreme Court because it violated the rights of the video game sellers. The justice who wrote for most of the case, Antonio Scalia, argued that violent video games show, at best, some correlation between exposure to violent entertainment and minuscule real-world effects, such as children feeling more aggressive or making louder noises in the few minutes after playing a violent game than after playing a non-violent game. This graph shows that with the increasing sale of violent video games, that the amount of youth violence went down. This obviously does not mean that video games make violence rates go down, but it at least shows that with the selling of more violent video games, crime rates are not necessarily rising. I predict that in the near future this will be much less of a problem, as parents who grew up playing video games will probably have a much better idea on whether or not a game is safe for their kids to play. Both video games and movies have a rating system that shows what age the media is appropriate for. Movies have the MPAA, or Motion Picture Association of America, with G for general audiences, PG for parental guidance suggested, PG-13 for content that might be inappropriate for preteens, R for films that may not have content appropriate for children under 17, and NC-17, which means no one 17 and under are allowed to watch the film. These ratings are chosen by a board of 8 to 13 parents, and they grade the film in their entirety, not only scenes that may contain questionable content. Originally, video games did not have a rating system, which became a problem with the release of Mortal Kombat. The game had digitally captured actors for the characters, which made the violence very lifelike. The game had extremely gory fatality moves, which Nintendo heavily censored to remove all of the blood, while Sega had the blood turned off, but a cheat code allowed all the blood and gore to be visible. In December 1993, there was a congressional hearing, and Congress was not happy with either Nintendo's excuse that its games were appropriate for all audiences, nor Sega's explanation that they had developed their own internal rating system. Nintendo and Sega, along with all other video game publishers, eventually agreed to develop a universal rating system for video games. ESRB, or Entertainment Software Ratings Board, is an independent rating system that all video games must follow. Similar to the MPAA, it has different levels of ratings. E for everyone, E10 Plus for everyone 10 years or older, T for teenagers and older, M for ages 17 and older, and AO for adults only. That rating is usually only used for games with lots of sexual content. These rating systems allow parents to carefully choose what type of media they purchase for their children. If parents pay attention to the rating present on the DVD, VHS, Blu-ray, or game box, then they can make sure that they are letting their children watch age-appropriate content. Parents should also monitor their children's internet activity, as there are many dangerous and inappropriate sites online. Movie and video game companies can also make sure their advertisements are very clear to the customer on what age the content is appropriate for. Retailers can also make sure that they do not sell violent media to kids without adult permission.